And a pleasant good afternoon to everyone out there in Irish Breakdown land. I am Vince D'Addario. I am the football analyst here at irishbreakdown.com. And I'm kind of flying solo today. Brian and I pre-recorded today's show. We're still going live because, of course, we want to see everybody's comments. And I will take a little bit of time at the end to try to answer some questions and do a little bit of Q&A. But obviously, I'm hamstrung by time as well. But today we are starting our brand new feature, and we are going to break down the Notre Dame offense versus the Florida State defense. And we're going to talk about rush offense versus their rush defense. We're going to talk about the pass game versus Florida State's pass defense, and then just overall scoring, et cetera, and what that looks like. And we're going to kind of play the advantage game, who has the advantage in each spot and really break it down by the numbers. And I'm really excited about this. This is a fun feature that we're doing. We, like I said, we pre-recorded it and we really enjoyed our time because it's just talking ball. And it's what Brian and I really enjoy doing the most. That's why we got into this in the first place. And I think that's what sets us apart with everybody else. And so we're just talking scheme, we're talking ball, and it's a good time. So sit back, relax. Obviously, the comments are open. If anybody throws in a super chat, I'll throw that in because I'll be monitoring the video obviously as we go. And then if it's a question, I will answer it when we get back. So if somebody wants to throw up a super chat, you are more than welcome. And I will try to answer some questions at the end, time being what it is. And here we go. So here is our brand new feature that we will do every single Tuesday. Okay, Brian, let's just dive right on in. This is our stacking up feature. It's Notre Dame's offense versus Florida State's defense. This is a pretty good. I'll say pretty good. Yeah, solid side of things for Notre Dame last year. And I would say definitely a weakness for Florida State last year as well.
Certainly.
I'm trying to be nice, trying to be kind, right? But this was an area where Notre Dame was very successful, especially against Florida State. What is it going to look like this year? That is the question. Can Notre Dame get better than they were last year? Can they go from solid to really good to great? And is there room for, well, of course there's room for Florida State to get better, but there's also room for them to get worse. Not as much room. The arrow has to be pointing up for Florida State, I would imagine. Right. But that is what we are going to talk about today, Brian. And we're going to go in order. We're going to start with the rush offense. Then we're going to talk about the pass offense for Notre Dame, and then we're going to talk about overall offense versus defense. We're going to break it down all the way for you.
Right. And look, this is the first, like you said, this is kind of that first test for Notre Dame. We're going to find out just how good this group can be. Now, they hung up 42 on Florida State last year. They had 353 rushing yards, took some deep shots, hit a couple deep balls in the game, but there's also a lot of sloppy play in this game. Turnovers, obviously Kyron Williams had a fumble early in the game. They didn't really put Florida State away on either side of the ball. And so this is going to be an opportunity for Notre Dame to kind of come out on the road against a quality opponent that you and I think is a bowl caliber team.
Sure.
This isn't your daddy's Florida State. We've talked about this. This isn't the Florida State you and I grew up watching. This is a program that's looking to come out of the ashes, so to speak. Where Brian Kelly was in year two.
Yeah, right.
Right. So it's going to be a test. It is going to be a test. You've got Notre Dame coming off of a playoff appearance, Florida State coming off of a 3-6 season. This is the side of the ball that has to get a lot better for Florida State, and this is the side of the ball that has to get better for Notre Dame if they're going to take that next step as a program. And so you've got those two things kind of colliding in this opener. Which one's going to win? Right. And that's what. And so we're, is it a end all be all test? No. Are we going to learn some important things about both units? Yeah. I think we are.
Oh, and especially in game one. Look, there's no chance we get all of our questions answered from either team, right? From Notre Dame's offense or Florida State's defense. And you referenced the fact that this could be a bowl team for Florida State. I think if they make it into a bowl, that's a successful season.
Yeah, you got to double their win total from last year.
Absolutely. Yeah, you have to temper your expectations with reality, right? And this isn't. the Florida State of old, right? So
sure. And Vince, we could say, hey, look, Florida State shouldn't be looking at a bowl game as a successful season. Yeah, I get that, but that's where you are. This isn't about history. This is about where you are right now. And where you are right now is that's where Florida State needs to be. Notre Dame, on the other hand, needs to make sure that, that's going to happen for you guys, but it ain't going to happen on September 5th. And then the other part too is, and we'll just briefly touch on this as we dive into it, but both of these units are going to look a lot different this year. More so personnel-wise than schematically. You look at Florida State, there's no Emmett Rice. He got hurt in the spring. He's probably going to be out for this game, last I heard. He was one of the starting linebackers. There's no Asante Samuel, who was their best cornerback last year, second-round draft pick. No Jaden Lars Woodbay. No Janarius Robinson. No Robert Kando. No Corey Darden. I mean, there's no Marvin Wilson, right? For Notre Dame, you lose 4 starting offensive linemen. Last year, you remember, Liam Eichenberg gets knocked out of the game. He has to leave. They bring in Dylan Gibbons to replace him. He's also gone. He's now at Florida State. We'll talk about that tomorrow. But, and then no Ian Book, no Javon McKinley, no, Ben Skoranek. So there's no Tommy Trumbull, who caught a couple balls in this game last year. So both of these teams are going to look personnel-wise a lot different. And that's also something that adds a lot of intrigue to this matchup is we think Notre Dame's going to look a lot different schematically and personnel-wise. Florida State, I think, is going to look a little bit different schematically and definitely look a lot different personnel-wise. They got transfers coming in. It's going to be a fun matchup, and it's going to be our first chance to learn a lot about both of these football teams.
Yep, no question. So let's jump right in. Notre Dame's run offense versus Florida State's run defense. And look, I mean, obviously we're going into week 1, right? So we have the team stats from last year to kind of look at. Notre Dame obviously ran the ball very, very well. Top 12 in the country, 211 yards per game, right?
200. Your top 12 is, just so people know, is because that's not on there, is total yards.
Yes. Yeah. Total.
Right.
Yeah. Right. Exactly. So, they ran the ball pretty well. That was one of their strengths. Obviously, that was the Notre Dame's crutch, right? I mean, that's what they wanted to do.
Right.
And then Florida State, on the other hand, rush defense, they were 97th in the country. Not so good. That is correct.
And it was worse too, because you look at it, they gave up 63 yards to Jacksonville State on the ground, right? FCS opponent,
which helped them significantly.
A ton. I mean, you look at their number, 199.2. It doesn't take someone with a degree in advanced calculus to realize that jumps up well over 200 yards if you take that game out.
Right.
And so that's something else to look at. Is I'm actually kind of, me, I always get these things in my head. It jumps up to 216.3 against Power 5 opponents last year, because the rest of their opponents were Power 5 opponents. Gave up 161 to Georgia Tech, 200 to Miami, 353 to Notre Dame. We remember Cotton Williams had 2 long runs. Chris Tyree had a long run in that game. 184 to North Carolina. That was a good performance actually by Florida State. I think that's a little of a misleading number. Yes, they gave up 184, which against most people, Vince, is a pretty good day for the offense. But for North Carolina, it was well under their rushing average. North Carolina last year averaged 235.8 rushing yards per game and averaged 5.8 yards per attempt. They held Florida State held them to 184 yards and 4.1, which is part of the reason Florida State won that game.
Yeah.
Then they gave up 291 to Louisville in a loss. They gave up 148 against Pitt and NC State, 2 teams that don't run the ball very well. And then they gave up 245 to Duke. So it was outside of Jacksonville State and holding North Carolina. I mean, again, that's a good performance against North Carolina.
Yeah.
Against the rest, not so much.
Mm-hmm.
And there's going to be a lot of new faces at it, right? And this right here, Vince, to me, is the most intriguing aspect of this new faces and new places kind of look to this matchup, right? All new offensive linemen for Notre Dame, a bunch of new faces for the Florida State front 7, and then some of the old faces are going to be in new places. So last year, for example, Amari Gaynor was a starting linebacker for Florida State last year. He was one of their top players that had 65 tackles, which led them with 36 solo tackles last year as a sophomore. He's back. Last year, they kind of played him in this game like a rover. Didn't work. He's more of an inside guy. Well,
sure.
What I believe, based on what I saw in the spring, what I'm reading about Florida State, sounds like he's going to be back inside, which is a much better position for him. I think that's going to help their run defense. I think Jermaine Johnson, they got from the transfer from Georgia, is a solid football player. I think he's was more of a pass rusher at Georgia, but he's 6'5", 260. He can play the run, and they're pretty big up the middle. Robert Cooper's like 350 plus. Fabian Lovett's a really big kid. They're going to be big up the middle. That's the other part of this matchup that's interesting. So, and they got some decent athletes at linebacker. Steven Dix is probably going to be the other starter inside linebacker. Kalen DeLoach is a guy that'll play inside. He can run a little bit. He'll also play out at that rover spot when they go to a 4-3, and that's going to be an interesting aspect of this too, Vince, is last year they were a pure 4-3 against Notre Dame, personnel-wise. But they would play with that guy out in space, and that was Amari Gaynor last year. In the spring, they lined up the same way, but instead of having a linebacker in there against their own offense, they had Jamie Robinson, who is the transfer safety from South Carolina. Well, one thing that Jamie Robinson was really good at South Carolina was run defense. He is a run defender, and we'll get into that when we get into the pass game stuff. But, that's going to be a question about this matchup, Vince. Does Florida State go 4-3? Thinking Notre Dame is the same offense they were last year? Do they prepare to play Notre Dame in a 4-3 or 4-2-5 personnel, which would fit what they do? That's going to be, or do they wait to adjust to that when Notre Dame comes out and spreads the field? That's something that is intriguing about this matchup, Vince, is do they want to get more athletes on the field against Notre Dame, or are they going to try to play big boy football like they did last year, which they had a lot of 8, 9-man boxes against Notre Dame, and that's why you saw big run after big run, because once you make that first line miss, there's nobody else there.
Exactly. And look, if I was a defensive coordinator and I'm going up against Notre Dame and I'm going up against an Ian Book-led Notre Dame, I'm going to stack the box too. I think that was good play. It's just they didn't execute it very well. And
they didn't have the horses to execute it.
And that's what I'm saying. Like you miss tackles, you're not in the right place. All of it. Check. A team like Notre Dame is going to gash you. And that's what happened. I mean, realistically, that's what happened. And, right now, like you said, let me pull it up here. Jamie Robinson is listed as the starter at stud, right? Which is kind of like their rover, right?
Right.
And so how are they going to use him? And I think that's the big question, because if he is starting and he is a safety body and they try to put him in the box, okay, he's a good run stuffer, but then is he the one that's going to be matched up against Michael Mayer?
Right. And that's not how they did it. How they did it was kind of treating him more like Notre Dame used Jeremiah Wusu-Kormo. He was out in the slot.
Okay.
And so even last year they did that against Notre Dame, is they would have that at times, but it was Amari Gaynor. Yeah. And then they would bring him in. That's the question. So this year, to your point, Vince, do they leave Jamie Robinson outside and then bring him off the edge if they want to run stunt? Or do they also have some personnel when Notre Dame does go 12? Do they then put Kalen DeLoach in the game and have him play the rover? So they have two guys that they list at stud in different lineups. One is Jamie Robinson, the other is Kalen DeLoach, who's a linebacker. So it seems to me like they're trying to be able to go with a faster version of that and then a bigger version of that. That's the interesting thing, is do they go Jamie Robinson, which I think helps them on the perimeter, right? Gives them more speed on the perimeter. Or do they go with Kalen DeLoach, and who gives them more size?
Right.
And do they do that against Notre Dame's base offense?
Yeah.
What do they do when Notre Dame goes 11? What do they do when Notre Dame goes 12 and 13 personnel? Well, again, 11 is 3 receivers, 1 tight, 1 back. 12 is 2 receivers, 2 tight ends, 1 back. And so do they try to personnel match with Notre Dame?
Right.
That's going to be another question. And it's going to impact this part of the game the most.
It's really interesting because, the depth chart I'm looking at, Kalen DeLoach is listed as a will, right? Yeah. And the one you're looking at, he's listed as a stud.
Right.
So you're right. It's going to be very interesting to see how they adapt to what Notre Dame is doing, because obviously he's an inside. He's been working at inside backer, but he's also been working as kind of the rover guy, right? So, yeah, I think that this is also a way, in my opinion, for a way to Notre Dame to be successful based on the personnel that Florida State decides to put in. Again, it's going to be a chess match. Is that fair to say? Like,
yes.
Based on who Florida State puts in, like, okay, here's how we're going to match up against 12 personnel. Here's how we're going to match up against 21, whatever. And Notre Dame's like, yeah, those are the matchups we want. And then, Tommy Rees goes and does something that is going to benefit Notre Dame. That's going to be a chess match. I think that's going to be fun.
And Vince, this is kind of the thing that is the interesting part about this matchup for me is we're going to learn a lot about just what you said. Tommy Rees's the chess match nature of what Tommy Rees does. And in this game, he's going against Adam Fuller, who's the defensive coordinator at Florida State. The interesting part about this, he was the defensive coordinator at Memphis. He came with Mike Norvell from Memphis. So the things that I'm curious about, Vince, are, yes, the personnel chess match, but then this, how does Tommy Rees utilize that effectively? And for the purpose of the run game we know Notre Dame can run out of two tights. We know this.
Sure.
I don't expect that to change in 2021. The question, however, that we had last year, the complaint we had last year is Notre Dame was too personnel. They had too many tells based on their personnel.
Sure.
Not so much they're going to run off tackle right here, but more of, we know that when they go 12 and 13, they're a run heavy team.
Right.
Can they do things in this game to balance that if Florida State tries a personnel match, which means running more out of 11 personnel than you have, and we'll get into this later, is passing more out of 12 personnel.
Right.
That'll be the interesting thing.
And I will say, and it was in the video that we shot from practice, I want to say Wednesday, that when they were doing the team takeoff, where normally we get nothing, right? They were running the two tight end set, and it was all pass plays out of the two tight end set, which I thought was interesting. Are they playing games with us? They know we're going to put that film out and other people are going to watch it, right? Whatever. But they were actually practicing pass plays out of the two tight end set,
right,
which we really didn't see a whole lot of, in the past. So,
and when we did see it, it would be a lot of play action, deep shots.
Sure.
Right. We didn't see the quick game, the stuff that we've talked about Notre Dame needing to do out of their offense. It was very run heavy, and then play actions and stuff off, bootlegs off of that.
Right. And look, Notre Dame's going to have to establish the run. I mean, they're not going to be successful doing what they want to do. Yes, you can do RPOs, you can do all of that, but you have to establish the run. You're still Notre Dame, and you still need to be balanced, right?
Yeah.
And so, one of my big question marks going in is what is this run game going to look like with four new offensive linemen? Honestly, that's a question mark of mine.
Yeah.
So I think this is a great matchup for Notre Dame in game one, even if Florida State is better. I'll give them the benefit of the doubt to say that they're better. This is still a great matchup for Notre Dame.
And I think they will be better. I mean, and this is the area we're going to find out, Vince, is how much better are they against the run. You've got a Notre Dame team that's got 4 new starters along the offensive line. Notre Dame team that lost two of their top 3 tight ends, right? One thing Javon McKinley was really good at last year, and he was good at a lot of things. But one of the things he was the best at was run blocking.
Yeah.
The receivers were really good run blockers last year. And that led to some of those long runs. Instead of a 15-yard gain, Javon McKinley dominates you, and it's a 50-yard gain kind of thing.
Sure.
So those are interesting matchups. And then you look at this Florida State defense, and we talked about their 2 starting ends are both transfers from the SEC. Jermaine Johnson came in from Georgia, where he was a regular in rotation, and then Kyer Thomas came in from from South Carolina.
Right.
6'2", in Thomas, Jermaine Johnson, 6'5", 260. It's a big boy. That's Isaiah Foskey size, right?
Yeah, right.
Kyer Thomas is 6'2", 275. He is a run defender. He is not, he's a Myron Tungavaloa, a Mosa type of guy, right? He's in there to play the run and be strong at the point of attack. They got Robert Cooper inside, who is a monster size-wise. He's 6'2", 338. If he's 338 pounds, that's down a lot from where he was in the past. He used to be listed at like 360, 350, that kind of thing, Vince. So I'm looking at their roster in 2018 or 2018 when he was a freshman, and he was listed at 378. So he's lost some weight. He had some good moments last year at times. He had some good moments in the spring game for Florida State. Yeah, it's a big boy. Fabian Lovett is going to be a new starter for them this year inside. I watched him in the spring game. He's a nose tack or a 3 technique that's 6'4", 310, wears number 0. You know what I mean? Like, that's a guy that thinks he's got some athleticism to him, And so, and then you look at the Dennis Briggs is a complete opposite of those two guys. He's like 280. He's a quick, athletic kind of guy. So they're going to have some guys that they can throw at Notre Dame, but are those guys going to actually be more effective? That's going to be the question. And can Notre Dame come out in a stat, like you said, can they get a movement against this group? Now, last year, Florida State had those big defensive tackles. You know, they had Robert Cooper, they had Corey Durden, they had Marvin Wilson. Excuse me, I was drawing a blank there. They had Josh Kando on the edge, Janarius Robinson. They had some big defensive linemen. So Notre Dame's strategy was, okay, let's get those big boys moving left and right. And they ran a ton of outside zone against Florida State last year. And it worked. And they just let Chris Tyree and Kyron Williams find some holes. And then they would just quickly hammer them up the middle. And is Notre Dame going to employ a similar strategy? Are they going to be able to be more effective between so that Chris Tyree's one of his long runs was off of like a counter action, right? But again, same thing. Get those guys moving left and right. Don't just try to run right at them and then down blocks and stuff like that, you know?
Yeah.
And so that was a really great strategy. Very well designed run game last year. Does Notre Dame kind of try to go back to that? Do we see some different wrinkles? Is this team going to be as good at those concepts as last year's teams were? Those are things we don't know that we're going to find answers to, Vince.
Right.
That's going to go a long way towards determining who wins this particular matchup that we're looking at. Because to your point, you nailed it. Yes, we have talked all summer how Notre Dame's got to get better throwing the ball. They got to throw the ball more efficiently, more explosively, all those kind of things. But if Notre Dame's going to contend for title, they're not going to be a pass-all-day team. They still got to be able to run the football.
Absolutely.
And Florida State, if they're going to be in a bowl game, has to figure out how to try to stop people from running the ball. Again, they don't have to turn into the 1993 Seminoles, right? They don't. They don't have to be the 2013 Seminoles, right? They just have to just not be as bad as they were last year. I mean, if they could just get down to 150 or so, that would be a huge jump. Notre Dame has to make sure that doesn't happen early. I also think this is the area where if you want to talk about how do you get the crowd out of the game early, yes, you take some shots, you complete some passes, but it's you establish the run and you say, hey, look, y'all, it's 4 different dudes, but nothing's changed.
Right. Yep.
You
establish the trenches.
Yep.
Yeah,
you still can't stop us.
Yeah.
You still can't stop us.
So one thing we're going to do when we're doing our stacking up preview here is we're going to decide who has the advantage.
Yeah.
And so the rush offense for Notre Dame versus the rush defense for Florida State. I am going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to give the advantage to Notre Dame. Brian?
Picking some sarcasm in your voice there a little bit.
Never.
Look, I think Florida State's going to be a lot better this year up front against the run, but a lot better means still a middle-of-the-road rush defense. I don't think Notre Dame's going to be as dominant running the ball last year as they were.
Right.
I still think Notre Dame has the edge here. We'll find out if that holds up, but on paper, who they got coming back, how it all works and all that, I still think Notre Dame holds the advantage, not just on paper, but personnel-wise and all those areas.
This is where they were last. This is where they were last year, and it's like this, right? Like they're kind of moving towards each other.
You could probably put Florida State off the screen,
right?
From where they were last year.
I'm being generous, but Florida State's going to get a little bit better. Notre Dame's not going to be quite as good running the football. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing necessarily, but I think they're going to come back just a little bit.
I would say they're not going to be as physically dominant as they were last year.
There you go.
We'll find out if they're still as good.
Right.
That's the question.
There you go. I like that. Yeah. But there's still this chasm in between.
Right.
So
correct.
That's my point.
Correct. But to your point though, Vince, even if Notre Dame's not as good, if we accept that premise, right? And again, we don't know if it will or won't be. If we're just accepting that premise because of personnel loss, but again, here's the other point too is it's not about will Notre Dame end up being better in week 10. This is a game 1 matchup.
Right.
Can we honestly expect Notre Dame to be that good in game 1?
Absolutely. Yeah,
that's the thing. And that's the point I believe you are making. But yes, still advantage Notre Dame.
So the next part we're going to talk about, the next aspect of Notre Dame's offense is the pass game. And obviously Brian and I have talked a lot about the pass game when it comes to Notre Dame, but today we are talking about what we think that pass game is going to look like against Florida State, and then what the pass defense is going to look like against Notre Dame. And so there are the numbers from 2020. Obviously, they haven't played a game yet, so we've got to look towards last year. It is what it is. We will update as we go, no question, as we move through the weeks. But these are the numbers from last year up to this point. Notre Dame, they were an average offense through the air. 58th is their rank for yards per game. But again, Florida State per game, 98th. So bottom third. And Notre Dame was in the middle third. right? So
Yeah.
Still advantage Notre Dame last year versus Florida State.
Mm-hmm. I would actually go on a limb and say this was actually the worst part of their defense last year. And it may not look like it. They gave up fewer yards per game.
Yeah.
Part of that is because they were down so often, the team just kind of piled up the run numbers late. I think their secondary last year outside of Asante Samuel was bad. I mean, it was bad. And they lost almost all those guys, right? Like,
so these are the guys
say that's a good thing,
play. Yeah, right? Yeah.
But they're going to be real young in the secondary. But I think they're going to be better. And that may sound crazy because they did lose the one good player they had last year, Asante Samuel. Number one, Notre Dame worked Asante Samuel pretty good. He didn't play like a second-round pick last year. Javon McKinley whooped him pretty good, and he whooped the other corners pretty good too. Notre Dame didn't throw a ton, but they had some big plays. Ian Book only threw for 201 yards, but he had 2 downfield shots to Javon McKinley. When they needed to throw, they were good. So I would actually argue that when you look at how Florida State had some of their success last year, again, they held Jacksonville State to 244. They held Duke to 148, had 3 picks. Duke was terrible at throwing the football last year. I mean, terrible.
Which is just mind-boggling, by the way, that because of who their head coach is, that they wouldn't have better quarterback play. But I mean,
Duke was in the 100s in 4 of their last 6 games.
It's crazy.
The ball. I mean, they threw 19 interceptions last year. They threw at least 1 pick, and all but the only team that didn't pick Duke off last year was Notre Dame. That was it. They threw 5 against Virginia, 2 against BC, 3 against NC State, 3 against Florida State. 11 touchdowns, 19 picks. Duke was really bad at throwing the football last year. I mean, they were at 56.3 completion percentage. In today's era, that's bad.
That's really bad. It is. It was good in 1947, like in the 60s, right?
Yes,
but not today.
Now they're going to be different now, though, Vince. They lost Samuel, but the guys that are stepping in at corner, there's going to be a lot more size at corner this year. You look at guys like Travis Jay, who is 6'2". You look at Jarvis Brownlee, who's got some size to him. They're gonna have a bigger roster this year, in my opinion, in the secondary. Jarvis Brownlee's 5'11", 181. That may not sound like a lot bigger, but Asante Samuel was like maybe 5'10", maybe. That's being kind. So I think they're going to be young. And another thing too is they had Akeem Dent trying to play corner last year. Akeem Dent's not a corner.
Right. He's listed at free safety.
Yes.
In the depth chart I'm looking at, and the third free safety.
Now, I think he's going to probably start for them now. I think that's a little bit of an older depth chart. I think he's kind of – because he was moving over from corner. That's why at the beginning of fall camp.
Yeah, I think this is a pre-fall camp.
Yeah, he played corner even in the spring.
Gotcha.
They have since moved him, and the latest I'm hearing is that he's kind of really picked it up the last couple weeks of fall camp because safety is where he should have been. The problem they had at safety last year is they had some run guys that just couldn't. They had some guys that were decent run defenders, but just guys that honestly shouldn't have. You never would have expected to play for a program like Florida State.
Sure.
And they couldn't run. They just couldn't run, Vince.
Yeah.
Akeem Dent can run for a safety. They still have Brendan Gant at safety. He was in part of that, and he's not that good. So they still have some personnel deficiencies, but they do have Akeem Dent, and they do have Jamie Robinson. Now, my question is when they go to their 4-3 defense, I think you're going to see Jamie Robinson at strong safety and Brendan Gant out with Akeem Dent at free safety. And what's going to make that interesting is last year, Florida State against, well, really a lot of teams, but especially against Notre Dame, they did a lot of single high safety.
Mm-hmm.
And they put their linebackers in a lot of pass game matchups, and that's an area where they're not real good. Yeah. And so, you look at Jamie Robinson, who's like you said, safety body, really good run defender. I'm trying to look up his numbers. I think he had like 70 some tackles last year, Vince, if I can find his numbers. Jamie Robinson. I don't know if you're able to. Let me see if I can pull that up.
You'll probably find it quicker than I can.
Yeah, but I believe he had like 74 tackles for South Carolina last year. He's not like a big guy. He's not like Steve Atwater, nothing like that.
Right.
But he's a guy that's a good hitter. Yeah, he was second on the team last year with 74 tackles. Actually led South Carolina last year in solo tackles with 47. So again, run defender, and he played a lot of strong safety for them. He wasn't off the ball. He wasn't like a rover type. He was an alley safety for them. He came from
coming downhill.
So he can certainly play that when they go 4-3 personnel. Now, if they go 4-2-5 personnel, I think that puts Jamie Robinson in a lot of good run situations, gets him a little bit more speed on the field. But here's the problem: he's not real good in coverage.
Right.
I mean, and that's probably being kind. When you look at his numbers last year, Vince, he gave up 75% completion rate last year at South Carolina. Wow. That's bad. And it wasn't like 75% like, they didn't throw on him very much. He gave up 39 completions on 52 attempts for 409 yards. That's a lot.
Yeah.
So on 52 attempts, they completed 75% of their passes against him.
Man. So
that's not good.
And when you are a safety / outside linebacker, whatever they're going to call him, right? He, in the pass game, he's going to get matched up against whoever's in the slot.
Right.
He's going to get matched up against potentially a running back, a tight end. None of those matchups, I would think, would be beneficial towards Florida State.
No.
And
now the other option too, Vince, is they could do more. They could stay more too high, play more quarters, or maybe play some cover 2 because they do have bigger, longer corners. Maybe they don't want to. Last year, they played a lot of cover 1 against Notre Dame, and Notre Dame just threw it over their head. There was one particular play where Braden Lindsey had a step on Asante Sammy. It wasn't a big step, but it was a step, and he just got overthrown by Ian Book. And he was pretty grabby on that play. Well, you're going to see some of that this year as well. If Javon McKinley's running by dudes, Kevin Austin's going to be able to run by dudes.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
And I was high on Javon McKinley, but I never said he was a burner, right? He just was great at body control and positioning and all that kind of stuff. So you look at that and you say, but their corners are bigger this year, but can they run? Right. So their corners this year probably would have matched up a lot better last year against Notre Dame. But this year against Notre Dame, it's a different Notre Dame team. So that's a bit of a concerning matchup. Their safeties do not cover well. I think getting Akeem Dent at safety improves that particular position. They didn't have any safeties that could cover last year. I think Akeem Dent's going to be a much better cover guy at safety than he was a corner. Okay. Now, Jamie Robinson, I don't see him being a better cover player. I think when you're as old a veteran like he is, you are who you are.
Right.
Brendan Gant is not going to all of a sudden become a good cover guy. He is what he is. And so I think those are areas where you look at and say, this is an area that makes me would make me real nervous if I was Florida State. And you're talking about being matched up against Michael Mayer and George Takis and Kyron Williams. And then you have to face the slots like Avery Davis and guys like that. Here's the other thing too, Vince. Notre Dame, what part of I thought was a good game plan last year is Florida State's linebackers are bad in coverage. At least they were last year. We'll find out if they've gotten any better. Steven Dix is now a sophomore. He's a year older. He's a decent athlete. Getting Amari Gaynor inside is going to put him in more favorable matchups as a linebacker than he was last year, playing basically as a rover,
as opposed to getting a more athletic guy.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think that they're going to look faster this year if they go with more of a true 4-2-5 personnel. I think that, to me, I would almost say, I would say it'd be probably smarter for them against Notre Dame to say we're going to go 4-2-5 personnel and get our safeties real active in the run game. Okay. As opposed to going 4-3 and then being potentially exposed. Their linebackers can't run with Michael Mayer. And so
and not many linebackers in this country
correct.
But especially
correct.
Right.
Yeah. So if I'm Florida State, say, hey, look, we're going to make their reworked offensive line force us to not be in this anymore. That's what I would do.
Yeah.
Because then that helps them in the pass game because they can get a little bit more speed on the field to defend against the pass. Now maybe Jamie Robinson could be matched up against Michael Mayer instead of a linebacker in space. Right. I don't think it's going to help them much, as I pointed out, but at least it gives them a little bit more speed. I think if they put linebackers on the field and Notre Dame's just going to spread them out and just attack them until they stop, But that's the predicament that Florida State is in not because of necessarily who Notre Dame is, because we still don't know how good Notre Dame's pass defense is going to be. It's more of because Florida State has a bunch of guys in the back seven that just weren't good at coverage last year. And it wasn't just the Notre Dame game. I'm watching NC State. I'm watching Miami. I'm watching every game. I'm like, man, these guys cannot cover. You look from their second and third levels between the hashes, just couldn't cover people. And that's problematic. I mean, you're not going to beat a lot of good teams when teams are just able to just pick you apart, on the second and third level when you're throwing the football. And and like I said, it wasn't just Notre Dame, Vince. It was a lot of the people that they played last year. So that's another part of this interesting matchup, Vince, is, are they going to be able to be better there? I mean, because, we talked about the numbers of how the completion percentage for Jamie Robinson. I talked last year, Amari Gaynor was that slot guy, that rover guy. He gave up 84% completion percentage. I mean, that's not good. You know what I mean?
Oh my God.
So yeah, I mean, teams threw at their guys. I mean, there's the other safety, Brendan Gant, 64.7% completion percentage. Akeem Dent as a corner last year, 11 of 14. Teams completed 78.6% of the passes against him. Steven Dix, their other linebacker, last year, teams went 15 of 17 against him, 80 for 154 yards. So again, teams could be super efficient against them last year.
Right.
We're going to find out if moving guys around is going to help them, if they go with more personnel. But what would be the biggest asset for them, Vince? Rushing the quarterback.
Mm-hmm.
See that number right there? That number right there at the bottom? This one down here?
Sacks allowed.
Florida State with 10 sacks last year in 9 games that was the thing to me, like, this ain't your daddy's Florida State, right? Long gone are the days of just remember. I mean, they they
were harassing
Andre Wadsworth. I mean, they just used to have all these great defensive ends. Well, no, Warren Sapp
was at Miami.
Yeah,
but
Peter Boulware.
Yeah,
then I remember the one year, like Peter Boulware, and I think it was Raynard Wilson, I think is who it was. Wasn't that the other big defense? I'm trying to look it up now. I think it was Raynard Wilson and Peter Boulware with that big, just great duo that they had. Yeah, let's see here.
Well, Derek Brooks was at linebacker.
He was an inside guy. Yeah, they had Peter Boulware and Raynard Wilson. They were both first-round picks in 1997. Peter Boulware went 4th. Raynard Wilson went 14th. And then a year later, Andre Wadsworth, who couldn't even start on the team the previous year, is the number 3 overall pick.
Yeah.
Right. Those days are long gone.
Right.
From what they've been. Now, they had some 5-star guys the last couple of years. Josh Sweat, Josh Kando, they just never panned out.
Yeah. Well, that's why they hit the transfer portal and brought in these two defensive ends.
That's going to make it interesting.
Sure.
Jermaine Johnson was once the number 1 JUCO player in the country. I think he was on one of those, last chance U's one of those years. He's a 6'5", 260-pound guy. He was the front 4 dominated in the spring game. Dominated. Like, it looked like Notre Dame's D-line.
Well, yeah,
what they did,
and there's a reason partly for that too.
But see, that's what we got. That's the unknown. Is it just, are they really that good, or
is the offensive line
is the line that bad, or is it kind of a combination of both?
Sure, absolutely.
That's something we're going to find out. And then you talk about you're going against Josh Slugg, who's a new starter. You're going against Blake Fisher, who's a freshman.
Sure,
that could be the great equalizer. Is that right there? And I think Fabian Lovett's going to give a little. See, they had no interior pass rush last year. I think they're going to have a little bit more of an interior pass rush this year, Vince, in my opinion. And that should help. If it's true, that could help a little bit. But their edge guys are going to have to be able to get one-on-one pass rushes. We'll bring Derek McClendon off of the bench. They're going to have some guys that can get after the quarterback a little bit, especially Jermaine Johnson. My question is, what does Notre Dame do to counter that? If he's causing problems, do they just chip it back? Do they have to keep a tight end in the game? What is Notre Dame's counters if their edge players are getting after it? And then can Florida State then find some other answers if Notre Dame's able to account for that? Can they blitz? Because their linebackers were not good blitzers last year either. But again, they were young. Gaynor was a sophomore, and he was like their veteran. Emmett Rice is a veteran, but
wasn't the other kid a freshman?
Steven Dix was a freshman last year.
Yeah.
So Kalen DeLoach was a young guy. I mean, they were super young last year. And they had no offseason, no spring ball. That hurt them too. They've now had all that. They can work a lot of those kinks. So that's what I'm curious to see, Vince, is how much better do they get coverage wise, and then are they going to be better rushing the quarterback? Because they had a bunch of they just did not have the edge speed last year. Janaris Robinson was a pro. Josh Kando, was a 5-star guy, but he was never the same after his early injuries. They just had no speed off the edge. That won't be the case this year with Jermaine Johnson.
Okay, Brian, it's that time. We're talking advantage game. Notre Dame's passing offense versus Florida State's passing defense. Again, I'm going to go out on a limb. I'm going to give the nod to Notre Dame. The word that you used was efficiency. And I think Notre Dame is going to be more efficient in the pass game, and Florida State's not going to be able to do anything about it. So I'm giving the edge to Notre Dame.
I'm going there too. This is a little different than the run game, Vince. I do think Florida State's going to be better this year. I do. I've said I think they're a bowl team. I think their defense is going to get better, but better is a relative term, right? And so I do expect them to be better. I think their pass rush is going to be better. I think they will have some moments where they get after Jack Cohn a little bit. The problem is I just don't think they have the athletes to run with Notre Dame. And I think when you look at Jack Cohn and the efficiency word you talked about, I rewatched the Notre Dame game yesterday, and there were 9 to 10 plays where Michael Mayer probably should have had 12 catches for about 170 yards in this game last year.
Right.
I mean, he just was like hitting moves, and then like all of a sudden there's like 4 steps between him and the linebackers, and he just wasn't getting the ball. Now, part of it was because Javon McKinley was in a one-on-one, and Ian Book threw a deep shot, right? So this isn't a shot at Ian Book. This is just more of a, he was going other places, and there were times when he didn't find it and scrambled and did his thing. But, I just think they're going to have a hard time chasing Notre Dame this year. And Tommy Rees last year did a lot of crossers. Remember, Michael Mayer scored on a crosser in the matchup against Emmett Rice. He just outran him. They used a high-low to get Braden Lindsey loose on a crosser. Javon McKinley caught a crosser. Tommy Tremble caught a crosser. Tommy Rees knows they're going to play a lot of man, and he knows they can't run with his players.
Makes sense.
And yeah, it does. And so I don't think that's going to change this year. I think he's going to have a real creative game plan to try to horizontally stretch Florida State, but then also take some shots like he did last year. It's going to come out of different looks, but I think that Notre Dame still has the edge. I think Notre Dame's going to hit some more quicks and some more bigs. I think that's the best way Notre Dame can neutralize that pass, that edge pass rush, is to hit some of those crossers, those quicks, those perimeter screens where you don't even give Jermaine Johnson a chance to get up the field. You're just catch and throw. I think those are some things that we'll see, and make them prove that they can cover in the second and third levels.
Right.
Make them prove it. And I don't think they can. So I go advantage Notre Dame. So we get down to the last part, Vince. It's really sort of big picture scoring. This is, all those things tie into this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no question. Because Notre Dame, obviously you and I talked about this a lot. We need to see Notre Dame's scoring average go up, right? They were 33.4. That was ranked 30th, which not terrible, but it's not good enough. It's not good enough for Notre Dame. They need to take that next step, and that next step is scoring more points. And let's be honest, Florida State gave up a lot of points last year. They ranked 105th in the nation, gave up 36 points a game. That's not good. I don't know any other way to say it. And I don't necessarily see this matchup going a whole lot differently. I still think everything you said when we were breaking down the Notre Dame pass offense versus the Florida State pass defense about Notre Dame being faster and Florida State chasing and all of that, I think is going to play perfectly into the hands of scoring for this Notre Dame offense. I think they're going to put points on the board, and I'm not sure Florida State has the dudes just yet or the experience. I'll even say that because it's still going to be some.
They're going to be it's going to be a young football team,
right? I don't know that they have the dudes or the experience to keep up with Notre Dame.
This is the big number here. This right here. That's going to be where we're going to determine how much better this Notre Dame offense is going to be. As you mentioned, that's not a terrible number.
Right.
That's not a terrible number. That's actually a decent number. That's not a terrible number. Notre Dame wasn't bad on offense last year. And as we've talked about, this right here, if this changes and looks more like what it did in 2019 and 2017, they're scoring 38 points a game.
Easily. Yeah.
Against a team that gave up 36. I mean, and remember, when Notre Dame played for Florida State last year, that was coming after their 2-week pause.
Oh, that's right.
So they had that that break, that COVID outbreak. So Notre Dame lost a bunch of practice time. and because they had a bye and they had Wake Forest and they had to cancel the Wake Forest game. So they had guys out because of COVID. I mean, it was a bit of a you know what, Vince.
Yes, I do.
And they still came out and they struggled a little bit early. They kind of relied on the couple big runs early. You know, remember Kyron Williams fumbled the ball early and set up a score. Then Lawrence Keys fumbled a punt and set up another Florida State score. You know, I think those are the things Notre Dame has to avoid in this game.
Sure.
And they have to avoid the turnovers. I mean, if you think about it, Notre Dame played 12 games last year, had 11 turnovers. 2 of them, I believe, came in this game. That's something that they have to avoid. And if they can do that, then I think those other things are going to be better. You know, I think Notre Dame is going to be able to be balanced. I think Notre Dame is going to have some big plays against Florida State. I think Notre Dame is going to they're the more talented team. They're to me the better coach team, and they're going to be the more experienced team. Because if you think Notre Dame is inexperienced on offense, go look at what Florida State is coming back on defense.
Yeah.
Not a lot of experience coming back. Right. And some of the experience they have is a lot like Notre Dame's. It's guys that played at other places, right? Kyrie Wilson played at South Carolina. Jamie Robinson played at South Carolina. Jermaine Johnson was at Georgia last year. It's good football players. Well, Notre Dame has that with Jack Cohn and Kane Madden, right? So that's kind of a wash. But none of those guys played like Jack Cohn played at Wisconsin, right? I mean, the front guys. They were rotational guys, right?
Exactly.
So I just look at it and I say, as long as Notre Dame comes in with an aggressive game plan and they execute at a relatively good first game level, you know, to me, this is a big Notre Dame advantage. You know, and again, Vince, those numbers are just bad. I mean, those are really bad numbers. And I expect them to get better, but better meaning, are they going to be top 50 or top 20? Top 50 gets you beat by Notre Dame. Top 20, okay, it's a ball game. I just have a hard time seeing, and this is the thing where you say, you know, everybody's worried about Florida State. This is who Florida State was last year, though. Right? Now, are they going to be better? Yes, they're going to be better. I love Mike Norvell as a coach. You know that. I think that they got rid of some cancerous players from that football team, more so on the offense than the defense, but there were some guys that needed to go on defense. They lost a lot of those guys, but you don't just go from this bad to great. And I had somebody say, well, you know, what about the jump Notre Dame made in 2015 or 2011 compared to 2012? I said, Notre Dame had a top 25 defense in 2011. People forget that. Notre Dame was a top 25 defense in 2011. Then they went from top 25 to number 1, right? That's not the same thing. You know, and there's nothing I can do in week
anything here, you know, for Florida State. There's not. And you can't expect. This isn't the NFL where you go worst to first like that. That's not really how college works. You know what I mean? It's a process. It is a building process. And look, again, I like Mike Norvell as well. And miracles don't happen overnight in college. And so you can't expect
when you inherit what he inherited.
Right.
I mean, he didn't. And here's the thing about Notre Dame. It took Notre Dame 3 years to get going. And he and Brian Kelly inherited Michael Floyd, Kyle Rudolph, Tyler Eifert, Zach Martin, Manti Te'o, Capron Lewis Moore, Lewis Nix. I mean, think about all the NFL players, and I'm talking first, second, and third round draft picks that Brian Kelly inherited.
Right.
Mike Norvell didn't inherit that.
He inherited a mess. He inherited a mess.
Because the one thing Charlie could do is recruit.
Right.
I mean, and I didn't even mention Chris Swat. I didn't mention Bennett Jackson. I didn't mention Zeke Mata. I mean, there was a lot of guys that were great, really key. Theo Riddick, Sierra Wood, Jonas. I mean, there was a lot of guys, or not. Jonas Gray was gone, but there was a lot of guys in that 2012 team that were keys to that 2012 team that were Charlie Weiss recruits.
Sure.
I mean, Reese was a Charlie Weiss recruit. Now he signed with Brian Kelly, but he committed to play for Charlie Weiss. Lewis Nix committed to play for Charlie Weiss. Or actually, Lewis Nix committed to play for Notre Dame. He didn't have a coach when he committed, right? That's the point. Brian Kelly got hired with those guys either on the staff or in the recruiting class. Prince Shumbo was already committed to Notre Dame when Brian Kelly was hired. He was a key part of that. Mike Norvell didn't have that advantage.
Right.
He inherited a mess of a roster.
Oh my gosh.
And this is also why I've said why I would rather play them in the opener than in week 10. It's this right here.
Yep.
Because I think it will get a lot better by the end of the year. Now, again, top 20 better? No. Top 50 better to where you're looking at Florida State 22 saying, they're going to have a top 10 recruiting class coming in next year, right? It's already top 5. I think it'll probably fall out a little bit, but it'll be top 5 to 10. and it's a legitimate top 5 to 10, not like the BS that they've had in the past. They're bringing in some good players. You look at what many young players are going to have, plus that, Vince. This is why I say Florida State's ascending. But for this matchup, and this is the matchup that matters, this isn't a Florida State 2021 discussion. This is a September 5th discussion.
Exactly.
And on September 5th, this is a mismatch. Now, the question is, can Notre Dame execute the game plan?
Sure.
That's going to be the question. Can they go on the road, game one, and execute? If they execute it in a good fashion, they'll win by 2 touchdowns.
A game one fashion. I'm not expecting a miracle. I'm not expecting perfection from Notre Dame.
Right.
At all.
Right.
But
they'll move the ball, they'll score, and they'll beat Florida State by at least 2 touchdowns.
I agree.
If they play better than we see in game one, which can happen,
sure,
then we could see them come out and really put it to Florida State. But I'm not predicting that necessarily in the opener because it is an opener.
But it wouldn't surprise me. It honestly would not surprise me. But I'm not going there yet either. So officially, Brian, advantage Notre Dame offense for Florida State defense. You are going with
Notre Dame scoring offense, rush defense, pass defense, or Notre Dame's scoring offense, pass offense, rush offense. Notre Dame has the advantage in all of them. The advantage is not as great as it was last year, but it's still a significant advantage.
Yes, I concur as well. So that is going to do it for this edition of the Stacking Up off Notre Dame offense versus the opponent defense. Tomorrow, stay tuned because we will be talking about the Notre Dame defense versus Florida State's offense. So make sure you tune in for that. So until then, that's Brian. I'm Vince, and we will talk to you tomorrow. All right, that'll do it for our first edition of Stacking Up. Hope you enjoyed that. We will have another episode tomorrow where we talk about Florida State's offense versus Notre Dame's defense. And you will see our tune change just a little bit when we start talking about Florida State's offense. There's we talked about the arrow pointing up for Florida State. It points a little bit more up on offense than it does on defense. And that is where, I don't want to use the word concern, but that is where we are focused, when this matchup happens on Sunday night. So make sure you tune in tomorrow at 12:30. We will go live again. It'll be kind of the same situation as it was this week. I'll intro it. I'll play the video. We already recorded our Stacking Up version for Notre Dame's defense versus Florida State's offense. And so we will play that, and I will come back, and I will talk to you guys a little bit. I am checking the comments here to see if there's any questions that I can answer. Let's see here. Tyler Dijak says, "What's up, IB Nation? Haven't made the chat in a while. 2 biggest storylines for me heading into the season are, can the O-line play well enough to give Cone and company time, and how will our secondary come together? What about you?" I agree. I mean, those are the big ones. It's the O-line is the big question mark. Are they going to be able to do what they need to do in the pass game? Can they do what they need to do in the run game as well? And that's obviously a big question. And then the secondary, they've been going up against Notre Dame's receivers all season, or all preseason. And what are they going to do when they're facing a different jersey color, different helmet color? That's a good question. I have faith in them, but we need to see it. And those are 2 very, very good observations by Tyler. Tom A says screen game and tight end. Yes, I think the screen game, they are going to take that to another level. And look, Michael Mayer, yes, Michael Mayer will be a very important piece to this offense. There is no question about that. The fifth horseman says Michael Mayer, 3 TDs on Sunday, 7 more to go. I think he is going to be a big part of this offense. But if I'm Florida State, that's who I'm taking away. I mean, that's who I'm at least going to attempt to take away, right? So it's going to be interesting to see how that storyline plays out as well, and who is going to benefit from the attention being on Michael Mayer. Because if they don't put the attention on Michael Mayer, he's just going to go off. We've seen him dominate defenses when he's double covered. So, it's going to be very, very interesting to see. Jonathan says he wants to see some throws out of the backfield to Kyron Williams and Chris Tyree. Sling it to him and watch him fly. Michael Mayer is going to dominate too. Yes, I think the running backs are going to be a big part of the passing game, so keep an eye on those guys. I think they're going to have a great game as well. Michael Johnson says, Vince, they have 3 transfers on defense. When those guys go off the field, how do the backups stack up? Well, what I can tell you is the backups were the guys that played last year, and last year was abysmal. And they upgraded tremendously at the 2 defensive end spots. That's 2 of where the transfers are, at the 2 defensive end spots. Huge upgrade. Obviously, the kid from Georgia is very, very good. But he was a backup, right? He was a backup at Georgia, and now he comes over to Florida State. He's a starter, but he steps in as the best that they have. And so that's going to be a nice test for Fisher and for Lugg, right? It's going to be those 2 defensive ends. When the backups come in, it is a considerable drop-off. And so we're going to see how deep Florida State really is, because in this day and age, they're not going to be playing the same 4 guys up front the entire time, right? And so they're going to have to go to their backup. So what does Notre Dame do when those 2 guys are not on the field? I think that is something to keep an eye on as well, Michael. Very, very good question. Let's see. Chief Brody says, I'm nervous. Anyone else? Chief, I am not nervous. Oh, he follows it up here. He says, do we think Florida State will be better or worse than Louisville was in 2019? Environment, edge, FSU. Otherwise, I don't know. Florida State is not going to be as good as Louisville was in 2019. I think that Florida State is bucking to be bowl eligible. I think that is their ceiling this year. Maybe I'm wrong, but when you look at who they have and what they bring back, both Brian and I like what Coach Norvell has done, or what he has done in the past, and we think he's a good coach. It's not going to be an overnight success for Florida State. It's just not. Florida State's going to have to play a perfect game, and Notre Dame's going to have to make mistakes, a lot of mistakes, for this to be a Florida State win. That's the way I see this game going. And I am not nervous at all. I think Notre Dame is going to do what they need to do to put this game away. And I think the final score, whatever it happens to be, whether it's a decisive score or whether the game itself is decisive, either way, I think Notre Dame wins this thing going away. So I'm not that upset. Or nervous, I should say. I'm not that nervous. John Rich says, if ND goes to 2 tight ends set and Florida State squeezes Mayer, tight end 2, whoever it is, could be a big factor on crossing patterns or splitting the seam on post routes. Yeah, I mean, look, Notre Dame is going to go to 2 tight ends, but at the same time, they're going to go to 3 wide receivers more than they are 2 tight ends. And I think George Takis right now is that number 2 tight end. Although Kevin Bauman has been making his case, obviously. I think Takis is more of a run blocker. I think Bauman is more of a pass catcher. So it really depends on who they have in and what they want to do with it. But I think they're going to throw more out of 2 tight end sets than they have in the past. And so we'll see what that looks like. John, I would be surprised if they're in 2 tight ends more than they're in 3 wide receiver looks. All right. Irish for Life, how do the electronic tickets work in the secondary market? How about the ADA tickets? I believe you can go on StubHub if that's the secondary market, and then that would download onto your phone as well. So as long as you go through a reputable market. I don't know about those guys though that are we've seen them in the past just holding up tickets, right? And scalping them. That's like the game day tradition is you see those guys on the street corners over by St. Mary's, etc. I don't know what happens with those guys, but if you go through a reputable secondary market, then it's just like it would be for any other ticket. It just downloads onto your device digitally. Dustin says, too many weapons for Florida State to account for. Will a defense that's trying to gel with a bunch of new guys? I see this as a difficult task. Agreed. It is a difficult task, and I don't see them being able to do that. What do you think Freeman is going to bring to Notre Dame? I assume you're speaking of Marcus Freeman, the defensive coordinator. And here we go. And Dustin has an answer. Aggressive defense that focuses on different alignments and bringing pressures from multiple looks. Love it. That's exactly what I was going to say. Very well done, Dustin. I like that. Jeff says it's the best time of the day. Have you heard anything about Cone, how Cone is fitting in with the boys? Was he a Notre Dame man right away, or did he have to prove himself at all? Well, look, he was the new guy coming in, and he is a very even-keeled young man. He basically said when he was interviewed the other day, he came in, he put his head down, and he went to work. And he quickly gained the respect of his teammates and is a leader. And he's not going to be the vocal leader like a Drew Pine. Drew Pine is a much more vocal, physical, up-in-your-face, in a good way, leader. Jack Cohn isn't that guy. He's going to lead by example. He's going to lead by hard work. He's going to lead with his play on the field. But it's very clear that the team respects who he is and what he brings to the table. So it's not cohesion, and how he's fitting in is not an issue for Jack Cohn in any way. So, all right. Looks like that's going to do it for today. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. Reminder that tomorrow we will have our second Stacking Up show, where we will talk about the Notre Dame defense versus the Florida State offense. Just how we did it today. We're going to break down the numbers. We're going to jump into it. Just two coaches talking ball, and that's what you guys come here for, and that's what we're going to give you. So I will see everybody tomorrow, and thanks for joining us on the Irish Breakdown podcast. Make sure, if you haven't signed up yet, right there's the link to the boards. Make sure you click that link underneath for 10% off of your Built Bar. That's important. Those are amazing. Brian put a picture out, I think, yesterday on his Twitter about all the Built Bars that he just got in. So make sure you check that out. Also, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, hit the notification bell, all that fun stuff, and tell your friends about IB. We are right here in the thick of the season, and we're going to have shows 7 days a week. So if you want your fix, you want your Notre Dame football fix, and you want an honest opinion, and you want to hear just two coaches talking ball, man, tell your friends, subscribe to Irish Breakdown, get on the boards. We're going to have a lot of fun this season. I'm really looking forward to it. So until tomorrow, I will talk to everybody then.